Close your eyes and imagine waking up before sunrise, not to an alarm clock, not to a phone buzzing on your nightstand, but to the crack of a whip echoing through stone corridors. You are not free to stretch, not free to speak, not even free to dream too loudly. Outside your window rises the glittering power of ancient Rome. Marble temples, roaring crowds, golden eagles snapping in the wind. But beneath that glory lies a hidden world of chains, whispered prayers, and stolen moments of hope. Tonight, we step behind the columns of the Roman Empire to discover what daily life was really like for Roman slaves. If you walked through the streets of Rome in the 1st century AD, you might have believed you were witnessing the height of civilization. Markets overflowed with spices. Arenas thundered with cheers. Marble statues gleamed beneath the Mediterranean sun. But for nearly 1 in every 3 people living in Italy, life was not a triumph, it was survival. Slavery was not a side note in Roman society. It was the engine that powered the empire. Roman slaves came from everywhere, captured in wars across Gaul, Greece, North Africa, and Britain. Prisoners were marched in chains, sold at auctions, and shipped across the empire. A young boy from Gaul could end up scrubbing floors in Rome. A Greek scholar might become a tutor. A Thracian warrior could find himself in a gladiator school, forced to fight for entertainment. But what did an ordinary day actually look like? Let's begin before dawn. A household slave, a familia urbana, would sleep on a simple mat near the kitchen or in a hallway. Privacy was almost non-existent. When the sky was still black, they would rise silently. If the master was wealthy, dozens of slaves might bustle through the corridors. One slave lit oil lamps. Another fetched water. A cook began grinding grain into flour. The rhythmic scrape of stone on stone was often the first sound of morning. Breakfast for slaves was plain. Bread, olives, porridge, meat was rare. Not all slaves suffered equally. A Greek slave educated in philosophy might teach children. Some earned trust and comfort, handling finances, managing estates, or acting as secretaries. Ironically, many educated Romans relied heavily on enslaved Greeks to teach them literature and rhetoric. But comfort never meant freedom. A slave was legally property, with no personal rights. They could not legally marry, though many formed lifelong partnerships. Their children belonged to the master. Families could be separated at any time sold without warning. Now picture a rural estate in southern Italy. Here, life was far harsher. Agricultural slaves worked in vast farming complexes. They harvested wheat, pressed olives, and tended vineyards. Overseers, sometimes enslaved men, carried whips to enforce discipline. Runaways were branded. Some were chained at night in barracks called ergastula. These underground rooms were dark, damp, and overcrowded. Yet even here, humanity flickered. Archaeologists discovered messages scratched into walls by slaves. Jokes, love notes, complaints about harsh masters. These marks are hauntingly familiar. One slave named Felix might dream of saving enough money to buy his freedom. Yes, some slaves could earn small wages called peculium. They could not legally own property, but masters sometimes allowed them to accumulate savings. If they gathered enough, they could purchase their freedom. Freedom, however, came with limits. A freed slave became a freedman, a Roman citizen, but still socially inferior. He owed loyalty to his former master, now called his patron. Still, it was a doorway to possibility. Some freedmen became wealthy merchants. A few even rose to positions of political influence. The Roman Empire, paradoxically, allowed for mobility if you survived long enough. Now let's turn to one of the most brutal realities: punishment. Roman masters had enormous authority. A disobedient slave could be beaten. A thief might be crucified. If a master was murdered, Roman law sometimes required the execution of every slave in the household. The logic was chilling. They should have protected him. And yet, Relationships were complicated. Some masters developed genuine affection for loyal servants. In rare cases, epitaphs on tombstones reveal deep bonds. One inscription mourns a slave girl. Who was dearer than life itself? Was it kindness? Possession? Love? These lines often blurred. Perhaps the most famous slave rebellion reminds us how fragile the system could be. In 73 BC, a gladiator named Spartacus escaped from a training school in Capua. What began as a desperate escape turned into a massive uprising. Spartacus commanded tens of thousands of rebels. They defeated Roman armies repeatedly, shaking the Republic to its core. For 2 terrifying years, Rome trembled. Eventually, Roman forces crushed the rebellion. Thousands of captured rebels were crucified along the Appian Way as a warning. The message was clear: Rome would not tolerate rebellion. Yet the fact that Spartacus nearly succeeded tells us something profound. Beneath the marble temples and triumphal arches lay a constant tension. Slavery built Rome's wealth, but it also carried the seeds of its fear. As the sun set over the city, urban slaves might finish their tasks by lamplight. Some whispered stories from their homelands, Celtic myths, Greek legends, African songs. In these quiet hours, stripped of titles and chains, they were simply human beings. The Roman Empire dazzled the world with engineering marvels, military triumphs, and grand spectacles. But behind every aqueduct, every banquet, every roaring crowd stood invisible hands. Hands that built, hands that served, hands that dreamed of freedom. And this is only the beginning. We'll step deeper into the hidden emotional world of Roman slaves. Their families, faith, resistance, and the small acts of defiance that history almost forgot. When we think of Roman slavery, we often imagine chains, whips, and silent suffering. But daily life was not only about labor. It was also about love, about belief, about fear, about hope carefully guarded like a hidden flame. Because even in bondage, people still fell in love. They still prayed. They still resisted, sometimes loudly, but more often in subtle ways. Ways so subtle that Roman history barely noticed. Let's step back into the city of Rome in the 1st century AD. The streets are crowded. Vendors shout over one another. The smell of baking bread drifts from ovens. A wealthy household near the Forum is coming alive. Inside, a young enslaved woman named Livia moves quickly between rooms, carrying fresh linens. She was born in this house. She has never known freedom, but she has known Marcus. Marcus works in the same household as a clerk. He keeps records, counts coins, and drafts letters for his master. He was captured as a child during a campaign in Greece and brought to Rome years ago. He still remembers the hills of his homeland, but they feel like a fading dream. Roman law did not recognize slave marriages as legal unions. Slaves could not enter into matrimonium, the formal marriage contract of citizens, but they formed partnerships called contubernium. These were deeply real, emotionally binding relationships, even if the law ignored them. Livia and Marcus share a sleeping corner. They whisper at night. They dream of freedom. They hope to save enough peculium to buy their release one day. But nothing is guaranteed. At any moment, the master could sell one of them. A single financial setback, a bad harvest, a political ambition. Any of these could shatter their fragile world. Slave families were separated constantly. Parents were sold away from children, husbands from wives. Archaeologists studying tombstones in Rome have found inscriptions erected by former slaves who later gained freedom. Many of them honor lost partners and children. The grief in those words feels modern. One freedman wrote of his wife, "She was most faithful and deserving, taken too soon." The simplicity is heartbreaking. Love existed, but it lived under threat. Now imagine the countryside again. On a vast agricultural estate in Sicily, dozens of slaves labor in the fields. The work is relentless. Harvest season stretches from sunrise to sunset. The overseer watches from horseback. Among these workers is Dama, a man in his early 30s. He was captured in North Africa. He remembers his mother's voice. He remembers freedom like a wound. At night, Dama and the other field slaves gather quietly in the barracks. There are no lamps, only faint moonlight filtering through narrow slits in the walls. Here, stories are currency. They tell tales of gods from their homelands. They whisper rumors of revolts. They speak of a man who once led thousands against Rome, a name still spoken carefully: Spartacus. Though his rebellion ended decades earlier, its memory lingered like a ghost. It proved something dangerous. Rome was not invincible. Faith also offered strength. Roman religion was complex and layered. Slaves were expected to participate in household rituals, offering incense to the family's protective spirits, the Lares and Penates. But many enslaved people quietly held on to their native beliefs. In the first centuries AD, another quiet movement began to spread among slaves: the early Christian faith. Christianity offered a radical idea that all souls were equal before God, that the poor, the enslaved, the forgotten would inherit a kingdom greater than Rome. It's no coincidence that Christianity spread rapidly among slaves. In secret gatherings held at night, enslaved men and women listened to readings from letters attributed to apostles, like Paul the Apostle. They heard words that must have felt electric. There is neither slave nor free, for you are all one. Did these teachings immediately end slavery? No. In fact, early Christian communities often encouraged slaves to obey their masters. But the psychological shift mattered. For someone like Dama, the idea that his suffering had meaning, that his master is not his ultimate judge, could be revolutionary. Resistance did not always mean rebellion. Sometimes resistance meant slowing down work when the overseer wasn't looking. It meant pretending not to understand an order. It meant subtly damaging tools. It meant helping a fellow slave hide a small coin in the dirt floor. Urban slaves found different forms of quiet defiance. A cook might skim a bit of oil from the master's supply. A clerk might adjust numbers ever so slightly. A household attendant might pass along information to others. But there were risks. Roman punishments could be brutal and theatrical. Slaves accused of theft might be whipped publicly. Those suspected of plotting revolt could be tortured for information. The Romans believed pain revealed truth. Some punishments were designed to humiliate. Iron collars have been discovered with inscriptions reading, "I have run away. Catch me and return me to my master." Imagine wearing that around your neck. And yet, some slaves climbed the ladder of trust. In wealthy households, certain slaves managed finances, supervised others, and handled sensitive matters. These velici, or personal secretaries, often lived more comfortably than poor free citizens. Under emperors like Claudius, imperial freedmen rose to remarkable power. Some controlled access to the emperor himself. They managed vast bureaucracies. Senators sometimes resented them deeply. This reveals something shocking about Roman society. Slavery was cruel, but it was not always simple. Status could shift. A slave could become free. A freedman could become wealthy. Meanwhile, a free citizen without money could live in desperate poverty. In Rome, legal status and social power were intertwined, but not identical. Now imagine a different setting. A gladiator training school. Inside high walls, men train with wooden swords. Their bodies are scarred, muscular, tense. Many are enslaved criminals or prisoners of war. Some volunteered, driven by poverty. All belong to a lanista, a gladiator trainer who owns them. Life here is paradoxical. Gladiators are property, but they are also celebrities. Crowds in the Colosseum roar their names. Women leave love notes. Graffiti in Pompeii declares admiration. Admiration for specific fighters. But make no mistake, every match could be their last. Daily life involves intense training, strict diets heavy in barley, and constant discipline. Bonds between gladiators run deep. They train together, bleed together, sometimes die together. These friendships were another form of emotional survival. Back in the city, Livia discovers she is pregnant. This is both joy and terror. If the child survives infancy, a dangerous gamble in the ancient world, it will belong to the master. Some masters encouraged slave reproduction. It meant more property without purchasing new slaves. Others sold children early for profit. Livia wonders, will her child grow up in chains? Will Marcus be sold before the baby is born? She continues working. She hides her fear behind lowered eyes. And this is perhaps the most astonishing truth about daily life for Roman slaves. They endured, not passively, not without feeling, but with a stubborn, quiet resilience. They built friendships. They fell in love. They prayed to unfamiliar gods. They carved their names into walls. They saved coins in secret jars. They taught their children songs from distant lands. They imagined freedom, even when it seemed impossible. Rome's grandeur depended on their labor. Its villas were cleaned by their hands. Its roads were laid by their sweat. Its emperors were dressed by their fingers. But beneath the surface, something else was happening. Ideas were spreading. Faith was shifting. The rigid structure of Roman society was slowly, almost invisibly, changing. By the 3rd century AD, the Roman Empire still looked powerful from the outside. Armies marched beneath golden standards. Emperors ruled from palaces of marble and porphyry. Crowds still filled the massive stone amphitheaters. But beneath the polished surface, something was shifting. The world that had once seemed unshakable was beginning to crack, and the lives of slaves were changing with it. To understand this transformation, we must first understand something crucial. Roman slavery was not static. It evolved across centuries. In the early Republic, slavery was smaller in scale. But after massive conquests, especially following wars against Carthage and the expansion into Greece, Rome flooded itself with captives. By the 1st century BC, the system was enormous. Estates in Italy depended heavily on enslaved labor. Cities were full of enslaved clerks, teachers, craftsmen, and attendants. But empires cannot conquer forever. As Roman expansion slowed, the steady supply of war captives declined. Fewer prisoners meant fewer slaves. Meanwhile, repeated uprisings like the revolt led by Spartacus had exposed how dangerous large concentrations of enslaved labor could be. Economic pressures also mounted. Maintaining huge slave populations required food, housing, supervision, and control. Gradually, landowners began experimenting with new systems. Enter the colony. By the 3rd and 4th centuries AD, many former slaves or poor free citizens were working as tenant farmers tied to land rather than owned outright. These coloni were not slaves in the legal sense, but they were not fully free either. They could not easily leave the estates they farmed. Over time, this system would evolve into what medieval Europe later called serfdom. Slavery did not vanish overnight, but it was slowly transforming. At the same time, political leadership began shifting attitudes, sometimes subtly, sometimes dramatically. In 313 AD, Emperor Constantine the Great issued the Edict of Milan, granting religious tolerance across the empire and legalizing Christianity. This was a turning point. Christian teachings had long emphasized spiritual equality before God. While early Christian leaders did not call for immediate abolition of slavery, their influence gradually softened certain legal extremes. Over time, Christian emperors introduced modest reforms, limiting the arbitrary killing of slaves, discouraging the breakup of slave families, and making manumission easier under certain conditions. By the late 4th century, under emperors like Theodosius I, Christianity became the official religion of the empire. The moral language surrounding power, mercy, and human dignity began to shift. Did this end slavery? No, but it changed the conversation. Meanwhile, daily life for enslaved people remained complex and varied depending on geography. In urban centers like Rome, enslaved artisans continued crafting jewelry, metalwork, textiles, and furniture. Some operated workshops almost independently, turning over profits to their masters while skimming enough to buy freedom. In port cities like Ostia, enslaved dockworkers unloaded ships carrying grain from Egypt and spices from Syria. The empire still depended on their muscle, but something new was happening socially. Freedmen, former slaves, were becoming increasingly visible. Once manumitted, they took their former master's family name and entered Roman society as citizens. Though barred from holding certain political offices, they could own property, run businesses, and accumulate wealth. Some even became extraordinarily successful. In fact, archaeologists have discovered lavish tombs built by freedmen, decorated with intricate carvings that proudly display tools of their former trades, symbols of identity reclaimed. One famous example comes from Pompeii, where the tomb of a free baker proudly advertises his prosperity. These monuments tell us something powerful. Freedom, once earned, was celebrated boldly. And yet, for every freedman who prospered, countless others remained trapped. Let's return one last time to a personal story. Marcus and Livia, our imagined couple from part 2, have grown older. Marcus, diligent and careful with accounts, has slowly accumulated a modest peculium. Years of loyalty have earned him his master's trust. One evening, in a quiet atrium lit by oil lamps, Marcus kneels before his master. He presents his savings and requests manumission. The ceremony is simple but symbolic. The master touches him with a rod called a vindicta and declares him free. Witnesses observe. A document is recorded. Marcus rises not as property, but as a Roman citizen. His legal status changes in an instant. He can now marry legally. He can vote in assemblies, though his political influence will be limited. He owes certain obligations to his former master, now his patron, but he walks the streets differently. Livia, however, remains enslaved. Freedom in Rome was often uneven, partial, fragmented. Families could straddle the line between bondage and citizenship for years. Eventually, Marcus may purchase Livia's freedom too. Their child, if born after Livia's manumission, will be free from birth. And that is how slavery slowly eroded, not only through law and religion, but through thousands of individual acts of purchase, negotiation, and survival. But history was moving towards something larger. In 410 AD, the unthinkable happened. The city of Rome was sacked by the Visigoths. The psychological shock was enormous. The eternal city had fallen. Over the next decades, imperial authority weakened in the West. By 476 AD, the last Western Roman emperor was deposed. The Western Roman Empire officially ended. And with its collapse, the vast centralized slave system that had once powered Mediterranean civilization fractured. Slavery did not disappear. It persisted in different forms across Europe and the Byzantine East. But the mass, conquest-driven system of the early empire faded. What remains, then, of Roman slavery today? Its legacy is complicated and deeply relevant. The Roman model of slavery influenced later European systems. Legal ideas about property, labor, and human ownership echoed for centuries. When Europeans began colonizing the Americas many centuries later, they carried fragments of Roman legal thought with them. For a modern American audience, this matters. Because when we study Roman slavery, we are not just looking at distant ruins. We are examining one of the earliest large-scale systems of human exploitation in Western history. A system that shaped economic thinking, legal frameworks, and social hierarchies that echoed into the modern world. But we are also witnessing something else: resilience. Roman slaves were not faceless statistics. They were teachers, bakers, nurses, accountants, farmers, gladiators, lovers, parents, believers. They laughed, they argued, they hoped. They scratched graffiti onto walls. They saved coins in clay jars. They whispered forbidden prayers in the dark. They imagined a tomorrow beyond chains. And in countless quiet ways, they reshaped the empire that claimed to own them. When you walk through the ruins of the Colosseum today, you might admire its arches and engineering. But remember, it was built, maintained, and supplied by enslaved hands. When you see statues of emperors, remember the attendants who dressed them. When you hear about Roman law and order, remember those who lived beneath it without protection. Daily life for Roman slaves was not a single story. It was millions of stories layered beneath marble and myth. Some ended in tragedy, some ended in freedom. All of them mattered. And perhaps the most astonishing truth of all is this: the empire that claimed absolute power over their bodies could never fully control their inner world. Not their love, not their faith, not their hope. 2,000 years later, their voices still echo if we choose to listen.